Wed the Earl or starve, her mother hissed in the cold front hall, with the snow coming down beyond the windows and the candles guttering in the draught. Those are your choices, Lucy, the only two you have, and I will not hear another word of refusal. You will marry the Earl of Mordaunt, or you will leave this house tonight with nothing, and you will see how long your fine principles keep you fed when you are a beggar in the snow. Choose. I am done coaxing. Wed him, or starve. And Lucy Fairfax, 21, standing very straight and very pale in the guttering candlelight, looked at her mother, at the desperation and the fury and the genuine fear behind the cruelty, for her mother was frightened, Lucy knew, frightened of ruin, frightened of the debts her father had left, frightened of a future with no money in it. And Lucy understood, with a calm that surprised her, that her mother meant every word, and that the choice was real, and that she had already made it, weeks ago, the first time she had seen the Earl of Mordaunt's eyes. "Then I will starve, Mamma," said Lucy. The words fell into the cold hall like stones into a well. Her mother stared at her as though she had not heard, or could not believe what she had heard. "You will." "What did you say to me?" "I said I will starve." Lucy's voice did not shake, though her hands, hidden in her skirts, were trembling. "I have thought about it a great deal, Mamma, these past weeks, and I have come to the end of my thinking, and the end of it is this: I would rather starve than marry that man. I know what you believe, that I am a romantic fool, that I am throwing away the family's salvation for a girl's fancy, that any sensible girl would take a rich earl and be glad of him. But I am not refusing him out of fancy, Mamma. I am refusing him because I have seen what he is, and you have not, or you will not, and I have tried to tell you, and you will not hear it. I saw him strike a servant across the face for spilling wine, not in anger, Mamma, that I could almost understand, but coldly, smiling, because he enjoyed it, because he liked the man's fear. I have heard how his first wife died. They say a fever, but the servants in that house say otherwise, and servants know, Mamma, servants always know. They say she died frightened and thin, and shut up in her rooms, and that the bruises were not from any fever. I have watched the way he looks at me, and it is not the way a man looks at a woman he means to cherish. It is the way a man looks at a horse he means to break, or a thing he means to own and use until it breaks of itself. And I will not, Mamma. I will not be owned and used and broken by a smiling, cruel man for the sake of his money, not to save this house, not to save you, not to save myself from the snow. I would genuinely, truly rather die honest in the cold than live warm in that man's house as his possession. So you have your answer. I will starve. And I am sorry for it, and I'm sorry it grieves you. I am sorry for the debts. I am sorry I cannot be the daughter who saves you the easy way. But I will not save you that way, because that way is not salvation. It is only a slower kind of dying, and I had rather do my dying in the clean cold than in his warm rooms." For a long moment her mother said nothing, and Lucy thought, hoped, even now, that the truth of it might reach her, that her mother might, at the last, choose her daughter over the Earl's money. She did not. "Get out," said Mrs. Fairfax, and her voice had gone flat and terrible, the voice of a frightened woman who has chosen her fear over her child. "Get out of my house. You ungrateful, willful, wicked girl. You would condemn us all to the workhouse for your fine feelings, would you? You would let your own mother be turned into the road for your romantic notions about a good and generous man who has offered you more than a penniless nobody has any right to expect. Get out, then. Go and starve, since you are so eager for it. Go and see how noble it feels with no roof and no food and the snow coming down. You will be back by morning, on your knees, begging me to write to the Earl and say you have changed your mind, and I will do it. And you will marry him, and you will have learned that principles are a luxury for the rich, and that the rest of us must eat. Go. I give you until morning to come to your senses. After that, I wash my hands of you. Get out of my sight." And Lucy Fairfax, who had been certain, looked one last time at her mother's closed, cold, frightened face, and understood that there would be no relenting, not tonight and perhaps not ever. And she turned and went up to the cold little room that had been hers, and she did not pack a trunk, for she had decided she would take nothing that was not truly hers, nothing bought with the Fairfax money that the Earl's marriage was meant to save. And so she took only what she stood up in, her plainest, warmest dress and her cloak and her boots, and one thing more, the single thing in all that house that was wholly only hers, that no creditor could claim and no marriage could buy, her father's book. It was a small, worn volume of verse, bound in cracked brown leather, that her father had read aloud to her by the fire all the winters of her childhood, his notes in the margins in faded ink, his thumb marks worn into the favorite pages, and her father, gentle, scholarly, hopeless with money, dead these 2 years and the cause through his debts of all of this. Her father had given it to her on her 16th birthday and told her, with his eyes full of the love that had been the whole wealth of her childhood, that a person who knew their own worth could never truly be made poor, whatever the world took from them, and that he hoped she would always know hers. She had not fully understood him then. She understood him now. She put the book inside her cloak, against her heart, the one piece of her father and the one piece of herself that she was carrying out of that house unsold. And then Lucy Fairfax walked down the stairs and past the front hall where her mother did not look at her, and out the front door, into the snow. The cold took her breath at once. It was a hard winter, the hardest in years, and the snow was coming down in earnest now, thick and silent, and the road beyond the gate was already white and trackless, and the nearest town was 4 miles off, and it was night, and Lucy Fairfax had nowhere in all the world to go. She went anyway. She pulled her cloak tight and held her father's book against her heart, and she walked out through the gate and onto the white road, into the falling dark, choosing the clean cold over the warm cage, exactly as she had said she would. And behind her the door of her mother's house closed, and the candlelight shrank to a thin gold line and then went out, and Lucy Fairfax was alone in the snow with her principles and her father's book and the whole indifferent winter, and she had never in her life been so frightened, and she had never in her life been so certain she had chosen right. She walked for a long time. She did not afterward know how long, for the cold and the dark and the falling snow erased all sense of time. She knew only that she walked until she could no longer feel her feet, and then walked further, because to stop was to die, and some animal part of her was not yet ready to die, however certain the rest of her had been in the warm hall. The snow deepened, the wind rose, the thin track of the road blurred and then vanished altogether under the white, and Lucy, who had thought she was walking toward the town, understood at some point that she no longer knew which way the town was, that she had wandered off the road into the open country, that the world had become a single howling whiteness with no direction in it at all. She kept walking. There was nothing else to do. She held her father's book against her heart, and she put one numb foot in front of the other, and she thought, with the strange clarity the cold brings, about her father reading to her by the fire, his voice warm and certain. A person who knows their own worth can never truly be made poor. And she thought, well, Papa, I knew mine, and look where it has brought me, into the snow with your book and nothing else, and I do not regret it. I want you to know I do not regret it. I would rather be here, freezing, with my worth intact, than warm in that man's house with it sold. And the thinking warmed her a little, which was dangerous, for the warmth of the freezing is the body beginning to give up, and Lucy did not know that, and welcomed it. She fell once and got up. She fell again and got up more slowly. The third time she fell, in the lee of a stone wall where the snow had drifted deep and soft, she found that she did not, after all, want to get up, that the snow was soft, and the wind was less here, and she was so very tired, and her father's book was warm against her heart, and it seemed to her, in the strange peace that had come over her, that she might just rest here a little while, just for a moment, just until she had the strength to go on. She knew dimly that this was the dangerous thought, the last thought, the one you do not wake from. She found she did not much mind. She had chosen the clean cold over the warm cage, and the clean cold was claiming her. And that was, she thought, drowsily, a fair bargain and an honest one. And she had no complaints, only a small sorrow that no one would ever know she had refused, that she would simply be a girl found frozen in the spring, and no one would ever know she had chosen this over being owned, that she had died free. I starved, she thought, with the last clear corner of her mind holding her father's book. I said I would, and I did. I hope you would be proud, Papa. I hope it was the right kind of foolish. And the whiteness closed over her, and the cold became, at last, almost warm, and Lucy Fairfax let her eyes fall shut against her father's book in the drifted snow by the stone wall, and the night and the storm came down over her, and that, very nearly, was the end of the whole short, brave, foolish story of the girl who would rather starve than be sold. It was not the end because of a horse that would not go on. For some little distance off, on the road Lucy had lost, a traveling carriage was struggling through the same storm, a great well-sprung carriage with a crest on the door, its lamps two small smears of gold in the howling white, its coachman cursing and its horses laboring and its single passenger sitting within in cold impatience, wishing he had set out a day earlier and beaten the weather, the Duke of Thornleigh going home. And the lead horse, a sensible beast, had stopped, simply stopped, in the middle of the white road, and would not go on for the coachman's urging, but stood with its ears pricked toward the open country, toward the stone wall, toward the deep, soft drift. And the coachman swore, and the Duke put his head out into the storm to ask what the devil was the matter, and the horse would not go on. And the Duke of Thornleigh, who knew horses, and knew that a good horse does not stop in a storm for nothing, did the thing that saved Lucy Fairfax's life. He got down into the snow to see what the horse had seen. He very nearly did not find her. The drift had half covered her already, and in the dark and the white she was only a slightly different shape of white, a softness against the harder line of the wall, but the horse had pricked its ears toward her, and the Duke trusted the horse, and he waded out through the knee-deep snow toward the place the horse was looking, and there she was, a young woman, fallen in the drift, her dark cloak going white under the falling snow, her face the terrible gray-white of deep cold, utterly still. The Duke of Thornleigh had seen death before, and he thought in the first instant that he had found it again, that this was a body, that he had come too late, that the horse had found him a corpse to bury, rather than a life to save. But he was not a man to assume the worst without checking it, and he knelt in the snow and put his fingers to the cold throat below the cold jaw, and felt, faint, slow, almost gone, but there, a pulse. Alive, he said aloud, to the storm, to the horse, to himself, and the word galvanized him. She's alive. Barely. Davies, Davies, get down here. Bring the rugs. The girl's alive. We must get her warm at once or we'll lose her. And the coachman came floundering through the snow, and between them they lifted her. And the Duke, lifting her, felt how little she weighed, and felt something else, something his fingers found as he gathered her up. That even now, even unconscious, even nearly dead, her arms were locked tight around something held against her heart, something she would not let go of even in the depths of the cold, and he had to gently, firmly loose her frozen fingers to see what it was, and it was a book, a small worn book of verse, clutched against her heart with the last strength of a dying girl, as though it were the most precious thing in the world, as though she had carried it out of some fire that had taken everything else. He did not understand it then. He understood only that a young gentlewoman, for her speech he did not yet know, but her hands were a lady's hands, and the book was a lady's book, and there was breeding in the fine bones of the gray still face that a young gentlewoman was dying in the snow 4 miles from anywhere on the worst night of the winter, clutching a book of poetry to her heart, and that he was not going to let her die if there was any power on earth to prevent it. They got her into the carriage. The Duke wrapped her in every rug it held, and then in his own greatcoat besides, and he held her against him to lend her the warmth of his own body, which is the oldest and best medicine for the deep cold, chafing her frozen hands, speaking to her though she could not hear, telling her she was safe now, that she had been found, that she must hold on just a little longer, and they would have her warm. And the carriage struggled on through the storm toward Thornleigh, which was mercifully not far, the Duke having very nearly reached his own gates when the horse stopped, and all the way the Duke of Thornleigh held the dying girl against his heart and willed the warmth into her, and felt, with a strange fierce protectiveness he could not account for and did not try to, that the storm had handed him something, that the horse had stopped for a reason, that this half-frozen girl with her book of verse had been put in his path by some purpose he could not yet see. The book, slipped now into his own pocket for safekeeping, he would look at later when she was warm and out of danger, and when he did look at it, late that night by the fire, while upstairs his grandmother's women worked to bring the girl slowly back from the cold, when he opened the small, cracked volume and saw the faded notes in the margins in a scholar's hand, and the worn thumb marks on the favorite pages, and, on the fly-leaf, in the same faded ink, the inscription to my Lucy on her 16th birthday, "Remember always your own worth, for a soul that knows its value can never truly be made poor. Your loving father." When the Duke of Thornleigh read that, by his own fire, of a girl he had pulled from a snowdrift, he felt something turn over in his chest that had not turned over in a very long time, for he had spent his whole life among people who knew the price of everything and the worth of nothing, who sold and were sold, who treated marriage as a transaction and a woman as a commodity. And here, frozen in his snowdrift, clutched against a dying girl's heart, was a father's plea to a daughter to know her own worth. And the Duke found himself burning to know, with an urgency that surprised him, what had driven a girl who carried that inscription against her heart out into the killing cold with nothing else at all. She came back to herself slowly, over 2 days, swimming up out of a deep, cold dark into warmth and firelight and the strangeness of being alive. The first day she was barely conscious, aware only of warmth, blessed warmth, of being wrapped and tended and given warm things to drink by careful hands, of a fierce old voice somewhere giving orders, of pain as the feeling came back into her frozen hands and feet, which the careful hands soothed. She did not know where she was. She did not at first much care. She only knew she was warm and not dead, and that someone was looking after her, and after the long cold and the longer loneliness of being cast out, the simple animal comfort of warmth and care undid her so completely that she wept in her half-sleep, silently and did not know why, and a cool hand smoothed her hair, and a voice told her to hush. She was safe. She was safe now, and she slept. The second day she woke properly, in a strange warm bed in a strange warm room, with weak winter sunlight coming through the windows and a fire burning in the grate, and an old woman sitting bolt upright in a chair beside the bed, watching her. A very old, very fierce, very upright old woman in dark silk, with white hair dressed high and sharp dark eyes that missed nothing, who saw Lucy's eyes open and said without preamble, in the fierce old voice Lucy half remembered from her fever, "Awake at last. Good. You have given us all a great deal of trouble, young woman, dying in my grandson's snowdrift, and I am glad to see you have decided against it, for I should have been most put out to have a strange girl die in my house and never be able to tell me how she came to be freezing to death 4 miles from anywhere on the worst night of the year. I am the Dowager Duchess of Thornleigh. This is Thornleigh, my grandson's house. My grandson is the Duke, and it was he who found you in the snow, or rather his horse found you, and he had the sense to trust it. You have been here 2 days. You very nearly died. Another hour in that drift and you would have. You are out of danger now, the physician says, though you will be weak a good while, and your hands and feet will trouble you, and you are not to get up. Now," the sharp old eyes fixed on her, "you will tell me your name, for we have been calling you the girl in the snow for 2 days, and it is undignified. And then, when you are stronger, you will tell me the rest, how a gentlewoman, for you are plainly a gentlewoman, came to be walking into a blizzard at night with nothing in the world but the clothes on her back and a book of verse clutched to her heart. I am very old and very curious, and I have decided to take an interest in you, and you will find that an inconvenient thing to have happen. For once I take an interest I do not let go. Your name, child. We will start with that. And Lucy Fairfax, warm and alive and bewildered, looked at the fierce old woman and felt the first stirring of the fear that would govern the next part of her story. Not fear of the old woman, who was alarming but not frightening, but fear of the question, of what would happen when these people learned who she was and where she had come from. For if they learned, they might send word to her mother, and her mother might come, or worse, might send the Earl, and Lucy had not walked into a blizzard and very nearly died to be handed politely back to the cage she had fled. "Lucy," she said after a moment, giving only the half of it, "my name is Lucy, and I am very grateful, Your Grace, more grateful than I can say to you and to your grandson, for I know I should be dead but for him, and I do not know how to thank you. But I must tell you honestly that I would rather not say the rest. Not because I have done anything wicked, I have not, I promise you, but because the rest of it is mine, and it is the reason I was in the snow, and if I tell you, you may feel obliged to do something about it, to write to someone, to send me somewhere, and there is nowhere I can be sent, Your Grace, that is not worse than the snow, and I would genuinely rather you put me back out in the drift than send me back to where I came from. I know that is an extraordinary thing to say. I know it makes me sound mad or wicked or ungrateful. I am none of those things. I am only a person who had 2 choices and chose the snow and meant it and would choose it again. So please, let me be grateful, and let me mend, and do not ask me the rest, for I cannot tell it without risking being sent back, and I would rather die than be sent back, and I have already very nearly proven that I mean it." The Dowager Duchess of Thornleigh looked at her for a long moment with those sharp, dark eyes, and Lucy braced for anger or pressing, or the brisk dismissal of her fears as girlish nonsense. She got none of those things. Instead, the old woman's fierce face did something unexpected. It softened very slightly into something that was almost respect. "A girl who would rather die than go back," the Dowager said slowly, "and has nearly proven it. Well, I have lived 80 years, child, and I know the difference between a girl being dramatic and a girl telling the plain truth, and you are telling the plain truth. It is in your face. You mean every word. I will not ask you the rest then, not until you choose to tell it. And I will promise you this, which you may believe or not as you like, but I do not give my word lightly, and I have never yet broken it. You will not be sent back, not anywhere, not to anyone, not while you are under this roof and not after, not by me and not by my grandson, whatever the rest of your story proves to be. You came to us out of the snow with nothing but a book about knowing your own worth. And you may keep your story to yourself as long as you please, and you will be fed and warmed and safe here for exactly as long as you need, and no one will write to anyone, and no one will send you anywhere. You have my word, child, the word of a Thornleigh. Now stop looking as though I am about to have you thrown back in the drift and drink this broth, for you are thin as a lath, and you have a great deal of mending to do, and you cannot do it frightened. You are safe. Believe it or not as you like, but it is true. Drink. If you are listening by your own fire tonight, the lamp low, the dark drawn close, the warmth of your own safe room about you, then settle in and be glad of that warmth, for our Lucy has just come in out of a cold that very nearly took her, and there is no better place from which to keep her company than a warm one. I shall tell you before the end where in the world I picture you sitting. But first you must meet the Duke who found her, and learn why a girl who would rather freeze than be sold should have fallen, of all the snowdrifts in England, into the path of the one man alive most certain to understand hers. She met the Duke of Thornleigh properly on the third day, when she was strong enough to sit up, and the meeting told her at once that she had fallen into stranger and kinder hands than she had dared to hope. He came in quietly, at his grandmother's summons, a tall, dark, grave man of about 35, with a still watchful face and gray eyes that she would come to know very well, eyes that held something guarded and old behind their gravity, and he did not loom over her bed or speak to her, as a great man speaks to a rescued nobody, but drew a chair to a respectful distance and sat so that she should not feel crowded or beholden, and said simply, "I am glad to see you better, Miss Lucy. My grandmother tells me you would rather not give the rest of your name, and that is entirely your affair. I shall not press you. I came only to see for myself that you were mending, for I confess I have been anxious. I have pulled a few things from the cold in my time, but never anything I wanted so badly to see live as you these 2 days, and I find I am very glad indeed to see you sitting up and scolding the broth." A faint, dry warmth touched his grave mouth. "You were holding a book. When I found you, holding it against your heart so tightly that even half frozen you would not let it go, I had to loose your fingers. I have kept it safe for you. It is here." And he drew it from his pocket, her father's book, the small cracked brown volume, and held it out to her, and Lucy took it with hands that shook, and held it against her heart again and could not speak for a moment. "You read the inscription," she said at last. Not quite a question. She had seen it in his face, the knowing. "I did," said the Duke of Thornleigh. "Forgive me, I did not pry for prying's sake. I was trying to learn who you were, that I might know who to— Well, I read it. Remember always your own worth, for a soul that knows its value can never truly be made poor." He was quiet a moment. "It is a very fine thing for a father to have written to a daughter. I never had such a thing written to me. The opposite, rather. I was taught my worth was my title and my acres, and the alliance my marriage might bring, and that my own particular soul was neither here nor there beside those things, that I was, in the plainest terms, an asset to be deployed, a price to be got, exactly like a girl brought to market. So I read your father's inscription, Lucy, and I will tell you honestly that it undid me a little, for I have spent 35 years among people who know the price of everything and the worth of nothing, and I had never seen it put so simply, that a soul knowing its value cannot be made poor. And then I looked at you, half dead in my snowdrift, with nothing in the world but those words held against your heart, and I thought, here is someone who was told her worth and believed it, and I should very much like to know what believing it cost her, for it has plainly cost her everything." He met her eyes. "I am not asking. My grandmother gave you her word, and I give you mine. You need tell me nothing. I only want you to understand, Lucy, that whatever drove you into that snow, whatever choice you made that left you with nothing but your father's book, I am, I suspect, more likely than most men alive to think you chose rightly. So mend, be safe, keep your story as long as you like, and know that the man who found you is not a man who will ever ask you to trade your worth for your warmth, for I have seen, in my own family, what that trade does to a soul, and I would sooner keep you in the snow than be party to it." And Lucy Fairfax, holding her father's book, looked at the grave, gray-eyed Duke who had pulled her from the drift and read her father's plea and understood it, who had said, unprompted, the one thing she most needed to hear, that he would never ask her to trade her worth for her warmth, and felt the fear that had gripped her since waking loosen just slightly its hold, for she had braced to be safe but beholden, rescued but owned, saved into a new and gentler kind of cage. And here was a man telling her, before she had even given her full name, that he understood the difference between rescue and ownership, and stood on the right side of it, and would keep her in the snow sooner than cage her in warmth. "You said your own marriage," she said slowly, for she had caught it, the thing under his words. "You spoke of the alliance your marriage might bring, as though Your Grace, forgive me, I have no right to ask, but you speak of being brought to market like a girl as though you know exactly how it feels. And a duke does not usually. No, the Duke agreed. A duke does not usually, but I do know exactly how it feels, Lucy, and I will tell you how I know one day, when you are stronger, for it is the whole reason your father's inscription undid me, and the whole reason I am the safest man in England for a girl like you to have fallen near. But not today. Today you will rest and hold your book and believe a little more than you did this morning that you are safe. We will trade our stories later, you and I, when you are well. Mine for yours, fair and even, for I find I do not want to know yours without giving you mine, it being a lopsided sort of thing otherwise, and I have had enough of lopsided things to last a lifetime. Rest now. The story will keep. They always do. She told him her story first in the end, though he had offered his. Told it a few days later when she was strong enough to come down and sit by the library fire wrapped in shawls, because she found to her own surprise that she wanted to, that after days of his quiet, undemanding kindness she trusted him, and that the keeping of the secret had grown heavier than the telling of it would be. So she told him. All of it. Her father, the gentle scholar, dead 2 years, and the debts he had left. Her mother, frightened and desperate and pinning the family's whole survival on a single throw. The Earl of Mordaunt's offer, which to her mother had seemed salvation, and to Lucy had seemed a sentence. And then, her voice steadying as she came to the heart of it, what she had seen of the Earl. The servant struck across the face for sport, the cold smile, the stories of the first wife who had died thin and frightened and shut up in her rooms of a fever that the servants did not believe was a fever, and the way the Earl looked at her, like a thing to be owned and used and broken. And then the ultimatum in the cold hall with the snow coming down, wed the Earl or starve. And her answer, then I will starve. And the walking out into the night with nothing but her father's book, choosing the clean cold over the warm cage, meaning it, walking until she fell. The Duke of Thornleigh listened to the whole of it without once interrupting, his grave face growing graver, and when she had finished there was a silence, and then he said very quietly, in a voice with something cold and dangerous moving under its quiet, Mordaunt, the Earl of Mordaunt. He looked into the fire. You should know, Lucy, since you have given me the truth, that I am not hearing it as a stranger. I know the Earl of Mordaunt. Not well. I have taken some pains over the years not to know him well, but I know of him in the way that men in my position come to know of one another, and I will tell you that everything the servants in that house believe is true, and worse. His first wife did not die of a fever. I do not know the whole of it. Such things are buried deep, and the powerful protect the powerful. But I know enough to know that you read him exactly right, that the way he looked at you was precisely the way you feared, that you were not refusing a good match out of a romantic fancy, but escaping a genuine peril out of a sound and accurate instinct that did you and your father's teaching very great credit. You did not throw away salvation, Lucy. You saw a trap baited with money, and you would not step into it, even when stepping out of it meant the snow. That is not foolishness. That is the rarest and hardest kind of courage there is, the courage to refuse a certain comfort for an uncertain integrity, to choose the cold, honest thing over the warm, corrupt one, when every soul around you is screaming that you are a fool. Your father told you to know your own worth. You knew it so well that you would die before you let a cruel man buy it cheap. I have never in my life been so glad my horse stopped in a storm. Lucy found she could not speak. The relief of being believed, not merely comforted, but believed, told that her instinct had been sound and her sacrifice not madness but courage, was almost more than she could bear, after weeks of being told she was a romantic fool throwing away the family's salvation. My mother thought I was mad, she managed at last, or wicked. She still thinks it. She thinks I will come crawling back by morning. It is well past morning now, I suppose, days of mornings, begging to marry him, after all, having learned that principles are a luxury for the rich. Perhaps she is right that they are. I cannot afford mine, plainly. They have left me a charity case in a stranger's house with nothing but a book. But I find," her voice firmed, "I find I do not regret it, your grace. Even now, even cold as I was and beholden as I am, I would rather be exactly here, a penniless nobody who refused him, than be warm and fed, and Countess of Mordaunt and his. I would rather have my worth in the snow than his money and the cage." My father was right. A soul that knows its value cannot be made poor. I am poor as a church mouse, and I have never felt less poor in my life than I did walking into that storm with his ring refused behind me. So, there is my story. You said we would trade. I have given you mine. I find I should very much like, now, to have yours, to understand how a duke comes to know exactly how it feels to be brought to market like a girl, and why you are, as you said, the safest man in England for a girl like me to have fallen near. My mother, said the Duke of Thornleigh, was the most beautiful woman of her generation, and the poorest, and she was sold to my father exactly as your mother tried to sell you, and it killed her. Slowly, over 20 years, the way the cold was killing you, only without the mercy of being quick. That is how I know. Sit, and I will tell you, for you have earned it, and I find I want to. And he told her, looking into the fire, in the low, even voice of a man uncovering an old wound he has long stopped probing. She was a gentleman's daughter like you, good blood, no money, a beauty that turned every head and was, in the cold reckoning of her family, her only asset, exactly as your mother thinks your face is yours. And my father wanted her the way a collector wants a flawless thing to own and display, the way the Earl of Mordaunt wanted you. He was rich and cold and considerable, and he made an offer her family could not refuse, and she was 19, and she was not asked whether she wished it, any more than a painting is asked whether it wishes to be bought. She was sold, and she came to this house, to Thornleigh, where you are sitting, at 19, the most beautiful woman in England, to a husband who valued her precisely as a husband values a thing he has bought at great price. He was proud of her, and possessive of her, and utterly indifferent to her, to the actual woman inside the beauty, to her mind, her wishes, her happiness, which did not enter into the transaction, and so did not enter into his consideration at all. He had bought a beautiful wife. He had not bought, and did not want, and would not tolerate, a person. And so, over 20 years he did to her, slowly and without ever once raising his hand or his voice, what the Earl of Mordaunt would have done to you faster and more cruelly. He extinguished her. He starved the person out of her, not of food. She had every luxury, but of everything that feeds a soul, of being known, of being valued for herself, of being allowed to want anything or be anyone beyond the beautiful ornament he had purchased. And she faded. I watched her fade, all through my boyhood, watched the light go out of her by degrees, watched her learn to want nothing because wanting was punished with cold indifference, watched her become, by the end, a kind of beautiful ghost drifting through these rooms, perfectly dressed and perfectly silent and perfectly dead inside. A woman who had been sold at 19 and had spent 20 years being slowly proven right that her soul was worth nothing, since the man who owned it had told her so every day in 1,000 silent ways until she believed it. He was quiet a moment. She died when I was 20. The physicians named some ailment. I have always known the true ailment. She died of having been bought, and of having let herself believe in the end that being bought was all she was worth, which was the one thing your father begged you, in his inscription, never to believe, and the one thing my father taught my mother to believe with every cold, indifferent day of 20 years. The fire crackled. Lucy sat very still, her father's book in her lap, her eyes wet. "So, that is how I know," said the Duke, "and there is more, the part that makes me not merely sympathetic but the safest man in England for you, as I said, for I was raised to do it again. I was the heir. I was groomed from boyhood to make exactly the marriage my father made, to find a suitable, beautiful, well-bred girl and buy her with my title and my acres and deploy her as an asset, to get an heir and an alliance and a hostess, and to consider her soul as little as my father considered my mother's. That was the whole of my education in the matter, that this is how it is done, that a duke marries for advantage and houses a beautiful possession and does not trouble himself with whether she is a person. And I might have done it. I was very nearly the kind of man who does it. But for my mother's fading, which I watched and understood too late, and swore over her coffin I would never inflict on another living soul. I have not married Lucy. I am 35 and unmarried, and the despair of my family, who cannot understand why I will not simply do my duty and buy a suitable girl as every Thornleigh before me has done. They think me strange or cold or unnatural. I am none of those things. I am simply a man who watched his mother die of being bought, and decided that he would marry only a woman who came to him freely as an equal, knowing her own worth and choosing him with it intact, or that he would not marry at all. And in 35 years I had never met such a woman, never even believed she truly existed, the marriage market being what it is, until my horse stopped in a snowstorm, and I climbed down into a drift and found a girl who had chosen to freeze to death rather than be sold, clutching her father's words about her own worth against her heart. So now you know, Lucy, why of all the men in England you fell near the right one. I have spent my whole life looking for a woman who would rather starve than be sold. I had given up believing she existed, and then you nearly died in my snow proving that she does. He showed her his mother's portrait once in the long gallery, and it was the moment Lucy understood fully what she had walked out of the snow into, and why this grave man had pulled her from a drift, as though his own life depended on it. It hung at the end of the gallery, a little apart from the others, a portrait of a young woman of perhaps 20 in the fashion of 30 years before, and Lucy, seeing it, caught her breath, for the painted woman was extraordinarily beautiful, with a face of such delicate loveliness that it stopped the eye. And yet the longer Lucy looked, the more she saw the other thing in it, the thing the painter had caught perhaps without meaning to, that the beautiful eyes were already, at 20, going somewhere far away, that the lovely face wore the faint, fixed pleasantness of a person who has learned to be looked at rather than seen, that there was, beneath the beauty, the first shadow of the long extinction to come, the candle just beginning, imperceptibly, to gutter. My mother, said the Duke beside her quietly, painted the year she married my father, 20 years old. Was she not beautiful? Everyone said so. It was the only thing anyone ever said of her. How beautiful she is, as though that were the whole of a person, as though a face were a soul. My father commissioned this within a month of the wedding, to hang in his gallery among his other fine possessions, his horses and his canalettos and his beautiful purchased wife. He was very proud of it. He never once in 20 years asked her whether she wished to be hung on a wall among the horses and the paintings. It did not occur to him to ask. She was a thing he had bought and was proud of. One does not ask a thing whether it minds being displayed. He looked at the portrait a long moment. I used to come here as a boy and look at her, not at the woman upstairs, who by then was already half a ghost, drifting and silent and gone behind her eyes, but at this, the portrait, the girl of 20 before the lights went out, and I would try to imagine her as she must have been before she was sold, before this house, when she was still a person who wanted things and argued and laughed. And I could never quite do it because by the time I knew her there was so little of that left that I had no model for it. No memory of my own mother as a whole and wanting soul. I had to invent her from the portrait, from the faint last traces of a self the painter caught just before it began to go. That is what being sold did to her, Lucy. It did not kill her at 20. It killed her slowly, across 20 years so gradually that by the end there was no person left to mourn, only a beautiful habit of a woman, and I grew up never having known the mother I was grieving, only the long fading of her. Lucy looked at the beautiful fading face, and then she looked at the man beside her, and she understood the whole of it, Why he had not married, why he had sworn his vow, why he had climbed down into a snowdrift for a half-frozen stranger as though it were the most important thing he would ever do. "And then you found me in the snow," she said softly. "A girl who refused exactly what was done to her, who walked into the cold rather than be hung on a wall among the horses. Gabriel, I was the thing she might have been, was I not? If she had been allowed to refuse. If someone had taught her, as my father taught me, that her worth was not her face. You pulled me out of that drift and you saw. I saw the woman my mother might have been if she had been braver, or freer, or better taught," said the Duke. "Yes, I will not pretend the thought was not in it. You deserve the whole truth, and that is part of it. When I lifted you out of the snow, I was, in some corner of myself, lifting her, pulling out of the cold the self that was frozen out of my mother by inches, getting there in time for once, saving the one who refused where I could not save the one who submitted. That was in it, at the start." He turned to her. "But I want you to hear the rest, for it matters more. That lasted exactly as long as it took me to know you. A few evenings by the fire, a few arguments about Cowper, a few readings from your father's book, because my mother, whatever she might have been, was not you. You are not her second chance or her ghost or the redemption of my failure to save her. You are Lucy Fairfax, who argues me to a standstill and laughs at my consequence and reads poetry better than anyone I ever heard and has a mind like a blade and a courage like nothing I have known. And I do not love you because you are the woman my mother might have been. I love you because you are the woman you actually are, who is sharper and funnier and more alive than any imagined version of my poor faded mother could ever have been. The snow brought me to you because of her, perhaps, but I am keeping you because of you. Those are different things, and you must never confuse them, for you, above all people, must not be loved as someone's second chance. You, who refuse to be loved as the Earl's possession, must not settle for being cherished as my redemption. You are not my redemption. You are my equal, and my choice, and the first person I have ever wanted for nothing but the entire, particular fact of being herself. My mother got me here. You are why I stay." And Lucy Fairfax stood in the long gallery before the portrait of the beautiful-souled woman who had faded into a ghost, with the grave, unfrozen man beside her who had been that woman's son and was now, somehow, her own free equal. And she reached out and took his hand, and the two of them stood a while in silence before the painted face, mourning together the woman who had not been able to refuse, and grateful together for the snowdrift and the stopped horse and the strange grace that had let one girl walk out of the cold with herself intact, where another had walked into a warm house and lost hers forever. And Lucy resolved, privately, standing there, that some part of whatever life she built with this man would be a kind of monument to the faded woman on the wall, not a portrait. The house had enough of those, but something living, a refusal, carried forward, that no girl in her reach would ever again be sold and faded for want of a door to walk out of or a hand to pull her from the snow. It should have been simple after that. Two people who understood each other so exactly, drawn together by the deepest griefs and convictions of their lives. It should have been the easiest thing in the world for them to fall, gratefully, into each other. And the falling was easy. That part happened almost without their noticing, over the slow, mending weeks of that hard winter, in the library by the fire where they talked of everything, her father's book read aloud between them. The Duke discovering that the girl he had pulled from the snow had a mind as fine as her courage and a dry wit that matched his own. Lucy discovering that the grave-guarded Duke was, underneath the gravity, the kindest and most honest man she had ever known. The falling was easy. The mending weeks before the Earl and the mother came were the quiet heart of it, and they were where the falling happened, slowly, in the library by the fire, over her father's book and the long winter evenings, in a courtship neither of them at first admitted was a courtship. It began with the book, The Duke had returned it to her, and one evening, finding her reading it alone by the fire, he had asked diffidently what it was she read, and Lucy had hesitated, and then read him a few lines aloud, a verse her father had loved, marked in the margin in his faded hand, and the Duke had gone still, listening, and asked for another, and then another, and so it became their evening habit. Lucy reading aloud from her father's book by the Thornleigh fire, while the snow fell beyond the windows, and the Duke listened with a hunger that had nothing to do with the poetry and everything to do with the woman reading it. He had never, he told her once, been read to. His childhood had held no warm fires and no read-aloud verses. It had held tutors and expectations and a beautiful, silent, fading mother and a cold, considerable father. And the simple domestic warmth of a person reading aloud to another by a fire was a thing he had seen in other, lesser families and assumed was not for the likes of Thornleigh. And to sit in his own library and be read to, from a dead scholar's worn book, by a girl he had pulled from the snow, was so unfamiliar and so unexpectedly piercing a happiness that he found he arranged his whole day around the hope of it. And they talked. That was the deeper thing. For the Duke discovered evening by evening that the girl in the snow had not merely courage, but a mind, a quick, well-furnished, argumentative mind, her father's gift, that met his own as no one's ever had. And they argued gloriously about everything, about the poems and about the world, and about whether her father had been right, that a soul knowing its worth could never be made poor. The Duke maintaining dryly that a soul knowing its worth could certainly still be made cold and hungry, as recent events had demonstrated. Lucy maintaining that cold and hungry was not the same as poor, that poverty was a condition of the soul and not the purse, and that she had been richer freezing in the snow with her worth intact than she would ever have been warm as the Earl's possession. And the Duke, losing the argument, conceding it gladly, because he had never in his life enjoyed losing an argument so much. He had spent 35 years among people who agreed with him because he was a duke, and here was a penniless girl who argued him to a standstill 3 evenings in 5 and did not care a fig that he was a duke, and treated him, simply and without awe, as a person, as an equal, which no one had ever done, and which he found to his astonishment was the thing he had been starving for his whole life without knowing its name. "You treat me as though I were an ordinary man," he said to her once, wonderingly, after she had comprehensively demolished some position he had taken merely to provoke her. "Do you know that no one has ever done that? Not once in 35 years. Everyone treats me as the Duke, agrees with me, defers to me, watches their words, wants something. You argue with me about poetry and tell me I am talking nonsense and do not appear to remember that I am a duke at all. It is the most restful thing that has ever happened to me. I had not known it was possible to be so comfortable in another person's company. I had not known company could be comfortable. I begin to think I have been very lonely, Lucy, for a very long time, in a way I did not have the words for until a girl out of a snowdrift started telling me I was wrong about Cowper." "You are wrong about Cowper," said Lucy, "but I take your meaning, and I am glad of it, for I have been lonely too in my way since my father died, and there was no one left who took me seriously. It seems we have each been missing the same thing and found it in the same fire. That is a pleasant symmetry. Now, you were saying something indefensible about the final stanza, and I mean to hear you defend it for the honor of the argument before I demolish it again." And the Duke had laughed, properly laughed, a thing his household had not heard him do in years, and defended his indefensible position with great enjoyment, and lost again, and was happy. And somewhere in those firelit evenings, over a dead man's book of verse, 2 lonely people who had each been missing the same thing fell entirely in love, without either of them quite admitting it, until the admitting became the only honest thing left to do. It was the landing that Lucy could not bring herself to do, and the reason she could not was the very thing that had driven her into the snow, turned now against her own happiness. "I cannot marry you," she said, the day he asked her. And he had asked her simply, without grandeur by the fire, having decided he would not insult her with a great performance. "Lucy, I think you know what I want. I want to marry you, freely, as an equal, you knowing your worth and me knowing it too. Will you?" And she had wept, and said she could not, and seen the careful hope in his face fold, and made herself explain, because he had given her the truth, and she owed him the same. "It is not that I do not—" She stopped and started again, braver. "I love you. I will say it plainly because you deserve plainness, and I am tired of being careful. I love you, Gabriel. You are everything the Earl was not, and everything my father would have wished for me, and there is no man alive I would rather spend my life beside. So it is not that. It is—" She pressed her father's book against her. "It is that I walked into a blizzard to refuse to be owned, and very nearly died of it. And I find I cannot now turn round and let myself be owned even by you, even by love, even gladly. Do you see? I refused the Earl because I would not be a possession bought to save my family. And here I am, penniless, ruined, with nothing in the world, rescued by you, housed by you, fed by you, owing you my very life. And if I marry you now in this state, what am I but another penniless girl saved from the cold by a rich man's charity, taking his name because he holds my whole survival in his hands? How is that different in its bones from marrying the Earl to save myself from the snow? It is kinder. You are kind, and he was cruel, but the shape of it is the same shape, a destitute girl with no choices marrying the man who controls whether she lives or dies. And I did not refuse one cage and walk into a storm only to step gratefully into another cage, merely because this one is warm and you are gentle. I will not be saved into a marriage. I will not have my whole survival depend on a man and call it love. My father told me to know my own worth, and a woman who marries because she has no other way to eat does not, whatever her heart feels, marry as a woman who knows her worth. She marries as a woman who has run out of choices, which is exactly what I refuse to be. So, I cannot, Gabriel. Not like this, not as your rescue. I love you too much to come to you as a beggar with no other door, for that is not the free equal you said you had spent your life waiting for. That is just a gentler Earl and a gladder cage, and I would rather lose you than become, even in your kind hands, the bought thing my mother tried to make me, and your father made your mother. Do you understand? I am refusing you for the very reason you should want me. I am refusing to be sold, even to you, even for love, especially for love. And the Duke of Thornleigh, who had asked her expecting the wound of a no and received instead something that made his heart turn over with a fierce, glad certainty, looked at the woman who had just refused to marry him because she would not be owned, and understood that he had, against all the odds of the world, found exactly what he swore over his mother's coffin he would hold out for, and that she had just proven it past any doubt by refusing him for it. "Lucy," he said, and there was something almost like joy under his gravity, "you magnificent, infuriating, entirely right woman. Do you know what you have just done? You have refused to marry a duke who loves you, while penniless and ruined and owing him your life because you would not be owned. And in doing it, you have proven, beyond anything you could ever have said, that you are precisely the free equal I have waited 35 years for no bought woman, no cornered girl, no soul that did not truly know its own worth could ever have found the strength to refuse what you have just refused. You are right. You are completely right. I will not have you as my rescue. I do not want you as my rescue. A rescue is what my father made of my mother, and I would sooner die than repeat it. So we will not do it your mother's way, or my father's way, or the Earl's way. We will do it your father's way." He leaned forward. "Here is what is going to happen, and you will hear me out, for I have just seen the answer whole, and it is a good one. I am not going to marry you while you are penniless and dependent and have no door but mine. I am going to give you a door, several doors. I am going to settle on you at once and irrevocably, independent of any marriage, a sum that makes you a woman of means in your own right, not a gift conditional on your loving me, not a bribe, but yours, free and clear, because a girl who would die rather than be sold ought not to be poor, and because I can, and because it is the nearest thing to justice I can do. And then, Lucy, when you are not penniless, when you have means of your own and choices of your own, and could walk out of this house tomorrow and live independently and never see me again if you chose, then I will ask you again. And if you say no, I will have my answer and I will let you go and be glad I knew you. But if you say yes, if a free woman of independent means, who needs nothing from me, who could choose any door, chooses me, then neither of us will ever have to wonder, will we, whether you married me to escape the snow. You will have married me because you wanted me, freely, as an equal, your worth entirely intact, which is the only way I have ever been willing to be married and the only way you have ever been willing to be wed. So, I withdraw my proposal. For now. Get well. Get your settlement. Get your independence and your choices. And then, when you owe me nothing and could leave at any moment, we will find out what a free woman chooses. I am not afraid of the answer. Are you? The settlement itself, the giving of it, was a scene worth telling, for it was the truest thing the Duke ever did, and he did it in a way that proved, more than any words, that he had understood her completely. He did not present it as a gift. That was the genius of it, and the kindness. A gift would have been another kind of ownership, a thing bestowed by a powerful man on a grateful dependent, creating exactly the obligation Lucy could not bear. And the Duke understood this, and so he did not give her the settlement as a gift at all. He framed it instead as a debt, as something owed. You will not take it as charity, he said, when the lawyers had laid out the papers, and Lucy sat staring at them, white and stiff, the old recoil rising in her at the sight of a man's money being moved toward her. I know you will not. I would not insult you by offering it so. So I will tell you how to take it, which is, as a debt I owe and am discharging, for it is one. Lucy, you saved my life, not in the snow. The saving in the snow ran the other way. You saved it before that, years before, without ever knowing it, by being the thing I had stopped believing existed. I swore over my mother's coffin that I would marry only a free equal who knew her own worth, or not marry at all. And for 15 years that vow was slowly killing me, turning me cold and shut and solitary, because I had come to believe no such woman existed, and that I had therefore condemned myself to a lifetime alone for the sake of a principle the world made impossible. I was becoming my father in everything but the marriage, cold, closed, alone. And then you fell into my snow and proved the woman exists, that the vow was not folly, that a soul that knows its worth and will not be sold is a real thing in the real world, and not a fantasy I had ruined my life holding out for. You gave me back my own vow, Lucy. You made 15 years of cold solitude suddenly worth it, because they had been spent waiting for something real after all. That is worth more than money. It is worth more than I can ever repay. And this settlement is not a gift and not charity, but the smallest possible down payment on a debt I will be discharging gladly for the rest of my life. You are not taking a rich man's bounty. You are accepting the interest on a thing you did for me before we ever met. Take it on those terms, for they are the true ones. You are owed. And Lucy, who had braced to refuse charity and found she could not refuse a debt honestly owed, who saw in the framing that the Duke had thought past her pride to the one form in which she could accept and remain free, signed the papers. And as she signed, she understood that she was not being bought, as her mother had tried to sell her, nor rescued into dependence as she had feared, but paid squarely, as one free person pays another what is owed, and that the man across the table had arranged the whole of it, this enormous generosity, specifically so that it would leave her standing taller and freer rather than smaller and more beholden, which was the exact opposite of everything the Earl of Mordaunt and her own mother had ever done, and which told her, more surely than any declaration could, that the Duke of Thornleigh had not merely rescued her body from the snow, but had grasped completely the thing her father had planted and the world had tried to dig out, and meant to spend his life watering it rather than uprooting it. "You are a very dangerous man, Gabriel," she said unsteadily, setting down the pen. "Do you know that? You have just made me a woman of independent means in a way that leaves my pride entirely intact, by calling your enormous generosity a debt, which it is not, whatever you say. Saving you from a vow is not the same as saving you from a snowdrift, and we both know it. But you have done it so cleverly, framed it so exactly to the shape of the one thing I could accept, that I cannot refuse without calling you a liar, and you are not a liar. You are merely the kindest strategist I have ever met. I see what you are doing. You are making me free. You are spending a fortune to make me free, specifically so that whatever I choose afterward, I choose it free. No one has ever spent anything to make me free before. They have only ever spent things to own me. I do not quite know what to do with a man who spends to set me loose. I suspect I shall spend rather a long time finding out. I suspect I shall enjoy it." He was as good as his word, and better. Within the week the lawyers had come, and the thing was done, properly and irrevocably. A settlement made over to Miss Lucy Fairfax, in her own name, hers absolutely, married or single, staying or going, with no condition attached to it of any kind. Enough to make her at a stroke an independent gentlewoman of comfortable means, able to take a house of her own, to live as she pleased, to want for nothing and depend on no one for the rest of her life. The Duke arranged it, and then, with a delicacy that moved her more than any declaration, stepped back, did not press his suit, did not hover, did not so much as repeat his question, but simply gave her the means and the space to be, for the first time in her life, entirely free, and waited to see what a free woman would do. It was the strangest, sweetest interval of Lucy's life. For the first time since her father died, she was not afraid, not of ruin, not of the snow, not of being sold, not of being dependent on anyone's goodwill, because she had means of her own, a door of her own, choices of her own, and she discovered in that freedom two things that surprised her. The first was how completely it changed her, how the constant low fear she had carried for 2 years simply lifted, how she stood straighter and laughed more easily and became, visibly, more herself, the self her father had known, the clever, happy girl. The world's cruelty had been slowly pressing down. And the second thing she discovered, in the new free clarity of having choices, was that she chose him, that with every door in the world now open to her, with no need of him at all, with the freedom to walk out of Thornleigh and take a house of her own and never see him again, what she wanted freely and entirely and with her whole intact and independent heart was to stay and to marry the grave, kind, honest man who had given her her freedom and then waited, asking nothing, to see what she would do with it. There was a conversation, in the free interval after the settlement and before the Earl came, that Lucy would remember all her life as the moment she understood what her freedom was truly for. And it happened, fittingly, over the question of whether she would leave. For the Duke had meant exactly what he said. He had given her the means to go, and then he had stepped back, and he did not press. And the not pressing was so complete that Lucy found herself one afternoon genuinely considering it, not because she wished to leave him, but because the freedom to leave was so new and so intoxicating that she wanted to test it, to feel its full weight, to be certain it was real. And being an honest woman, she told him so. "I have been thinking," she said, "that I might take a house, in Bath perhaps, or by the sea, now that I have the means. A small establishment of my own, where I answer to no one and depend on no one and may live exactly as I please." She watched his face as she said it, half ashamed of the testing, unable to help it. "I want you to know I am thinking it, not because not because of any coldness toward you, but because I have never in my life had the option of going, of choosing my own direction, of being somewhere because I chose it rather than because I had no other choice. And I find the option itself is so precious to me, so new, that I half want to exercise it just to prove it is real, just to stand somewhere I chose, on means of my own, and feel what that feels like after a lifetime of being placed where others put me. Does that wound you? I do not wish to wound you, but I promised you honesty, and that is the honest truth, that I am considering leaving, not because I want to be gone from you, but because I want for once to be somewhere by my own free choosing, and I have never had that, and you have just given it to me, and I find I am almost dizzy with it. And the Duke of Thornleigh, who might have been forgiven a flicker of fear, having given the woman he loved the very means to walk away, and now hearing her consider it, did not flinch and did not argue, and did not even slightly try to talk her out of it, and his answer was the thing that decided her, though he did not say it to decide her. Then you should do it, he said simply. If that is what your freedom wants, to stand somewhere of your own choosing, on means of your own, answering to no one, then you should have it, Lucy, all of it, and I will help you find the house, and I will not say one word to dissuade you, for the whole point of the settlement was that you should be free, and a freedom I tried to talk you out of exercising would be no freedom at all, only a longer leash. So go to Bath, or to the sea, and take your house, and answer to no one, and feel what it feels like to stand somewhere you chose. I mean it entirely. I would rather you spent your freedom and were truly free than stayed with me having never tasted it, and always wondered. If you go, I shall miss you past bearing, and I shall hope, I will not pretend I will not hope, that some day, having tasted the freedom, you might choose to spend some of it here, with me. But that must be your choosing, freely, from a position of having had the alternative. So go, if going is what freedom wants. I did not set you loose in order to hold the leash. I set you loose because a soul like yours ought to be loose. What you do with it is yours. And Lucy looked at him, at the man who loved her, and had just, without a flicker, told her to go and take her freedom and spend it elsewhere, because he would rather she were truly free than kept, and understood all at once and completely what her freedom was for, understood that she had been about to mistake the option for the goal, the leaving for the living, that the point of being free was not to prove it by going, but to be able, for the first time in her life, to stay by choice. That a woman who stayed because she had no other door was caged, but a woman who stayed when every door stood open was free in the deepest way there was, freer than any leaving could make her. She did not need to go to Bath to prove she was free. She was free already, standing in this room with every door open. And the freest thing she could do, the thing that would mean the most precisely because she did not have to do it, was to choose, of her own will, with the whole world available to her, the one room she actually wanted. No, she said slowly, wonderingly, as the understanding broke over her. No, I see it now. I do not want to go to Bath. I never wanted to go to Bath. I wanted to know that I could, and I can. You have just proven it past any doubt by telling me to go without a flicker. That was the whole of what I needed, to know the door was truly open, that you would truly let me walk through it, that the freedom was real and not a kindness with strings. And it is real, so now I do not need to use it. I can stay, not because I have no other door, but because with every door in the world open, this is the room I choose. That is what freedom is for, is it not? Not the leaving, the choosing. I have been free for 3 weeks, and I nearly wasted it proving I could go, when the far better use of it was sitting right here all along, to stay, on purpose, freely, because I want to. I am not going to Bath, Gabriel. I am going to stay exactly here, by this fire, in this room, with you. And I am going to do it as the freest choice I have ever made, which it is precisely because I could do otherwise and am not. There. I have tested my freedom after all, and it turns out it was for this. But before she could tell him so, before the free woman could give the Duke his free answer, the cage came looking for her, as cages do, for the Earl of Mordaunt had not forgotten that he had been refused, and the Earl of Mordaunt was not a man who suffered being refused. It was Lucy's mother who came first, in fact, tracking her at last to Thornleigh through the slow channels of servants' gossip and county talk. A beautiful, penniless girl rescued from the snow by the Duke of Thornleigh being exactly the sort of thing that travels. Mrs. Fairfax arrived in a hired chaise and was admitted and met her daughter in the Thornleigh drawing-room, and Lucy braced herself for fury, for guilt, for the old coercion. She got something worse. She got her mother's desperation, naked and pitiful, and it was very nearly harder to withstand than cruelty. "Lucy! Oh, thank God you are alive! I have been frantic. I thought you dead in the snow. I have not slept." And her mother was weeping, genuinely weeping, and reaching for her. And Lucy stood very still and let herself be embraced and did not soften, because she had learned to read the thing under the thing. "Oh, my darling, you are alive and rescued by a duke. And, Lucy, listen, this changes everything. Do you not see? The Earl need never know how it happened. We can say you were visiting. Your reputation can be mended. He is still willing, Lucy. I have had a letter. He is still willing to have you despite everything. He is a generous man. He will overlook your running off his girlish nerves, and the marriage can still go forward. We can still be saved. You can still—" "Mama," Lucy's voice was quiet and very steady. "Stop. I am not marrying the Earl of Mordaunt. I was never going to marry the Earl of Mordaunt. I walked into a blizzard to make that plain, and I very nearly died of it, and I will walk into another one before I will marry him. And no amount of your weeping will change it, so you may save your tears, for they will not move me and they dishonor us both, since we both know they are not really tears for me but for the money. Sit down. I have things to say to you, and then I will decide what is to be done with you, for the world has turned over since you put me out in the snow, Mama, and you do not yet understand how completely." "You put me out in the snow, Mama," Lucy said, when her mother had sat, white-faced. "To die, or to crawl back and be sold, those being the only two ends you imagined for me. I did neither. I chose the snow, and I meant it, and I would have died in it rather than come crawling back to be the Earl's possession. And I want you to sit with that, Mama, truly sit with it, that your daughter would genuinely rather have frozen to death than marry the man you were so determined to sell her to. That is not girlish nerves. That is the plainest verdict a person can render on a thing, rendered with her own life. I refused him with my body, in the snow. You should believe me now if you never did before." She drew a breath. "And here is what you do not yet understand. I have means of my own now, a settlement made over to me freely, mine absolutely, enough to live on comfortably for the rest of my life, with no need of the Earl or his money or any man's. So the thing you sold me for, Mama, the salvation you were so sure, required my marrying a cruel man. It has come anyway, without the sale, only not through me selling myself, through a good man choosing to do a just thing, which means the sale was never necessary at all, was it? It was only the limit of your imagination and the failure of your nerve. There was always another way. You simply could not see it, or could not bear the risk of it, and so you reached for the certain cruel thing, the bought marriage, and tried to force your daughter into it and put her out in the snow when she refused. The salvation you wanted did not require my ruin, Mama. It only required your courage, which you did not have, and so you spent mine instead, and very nearly spent my life." Her mother had begun, quietly, to weep again. Real tears this time, Lucy thought. Tears of a woman seeing herself plainly for the first time. "And yet," said Lucy, and here her voice gentled, for she had decided, in the days of her new freedom, what kind of person she wished to be, and it was not a vengeful one. "I find I am not going to leave you to the ruin you feared, though heaven knows you left me to a worse one. Out of the means that are now mine, I will see the debts paid, and I will see you kept. Modestly, not grandly. You will not like how modestly, somewhere respectable and safe, where you may live out your days without the workhouse you so dreaded. Not because you deserve it. You put me in the snow. You do not deserve it. But because my father loved you once, before the debts and the fear made you small, and because I find I would rather be the kind of daughter who saves her mother than the kind who lets her suffer, even a mother who tried to sell her. For that is what knowing my own worth means, Mama, in the end, not only refusing to be bought, but refusing to become, in my turn, the kind of hard, frightened soul that does the buying and selling. I will keep you. But I will keep you on my terms with my money, freely given by a free woman, and you will never again, as long as you live, tell me whom to marry or threaten me with the snow, for those days are over, and the penniless daughter you put out to freeze is gone, and in her place is a woman of independent means who will be deciding things for herself from now on. Do you understand? Good. Then dry your eyes. We will speak of the arrangements later. There is, I think, about to be a larger reckoning than ours, and you had as well stay for it, for I believe I hear a carriage, and I have a strong suspicion of who is in it. For there was indeed a carriage come up the Thornleigh drive in the thin winter sun, a carriage with a crest Lucy knew, the crest of the Earl of Mordaunt, who had had the same county gossip her mother had, and who had come not weeping, not pleading, but in cold, affronted possessiveness, to reclaim the girl who had dared refuse him and make him, by her refusal and her rescue, a figure of talk. For the Earl of Mordaunt did not love Lucy Fairfax, had never loved her, but he had decided to own her. And a man like the Earl does not lightly suffer the thing he has decided to own to be pulled from a snowdrift by another man and kept. What the Duke knew about the Earl of Mordaunt, the thing that hung over the Earl like a drawn sword and sent him out of the Thornleigh drawing-room defeated, was a thing the Duke had carried quietly for 3 years and had never expected to use, and it deserves the telling, for it was the reason a part of him had been braced for the Earl of Mordaunt long before Lucy ever fell into his snow. The Earl's first wife had been a girl named Sophia, a sweet, gentle, unremarkable girl of good family and small fortune, married to the Earl at 18 for the usual reasons, the alliance suiting both families, and she had died at 20, of a fever, the world was told, after a long retirement from society occasioned by her delicate health. That was the public story, and the world had believed it because the world believes what powerful men pay it to believe, and because a young wife dying of a fever after a delicate decline is the most ordinary tragedy imaginable, exciting no remark. But the Duke of Thornleigh had a cousin, a woman married into a family connected to Sophia's, who had been one of the few permitted to visit the young countess in her long retirement, and who had come away from those visits frightened and had confided to the Duke, in the strictest confidence, what she had seen. A girl not delicate but terrified, not declining but being slowly destroyed, thin and silent and flinching, shut up in her rooms, watched, controlled, extinguished by inches under a husband's smiling, cold cruelty, exactly as the Duke's own mother had been extinguished, only faster and with a colder deliberateness. And Sophia had died, the cousin was certain, though she could never prove it, not of any fever, but of the slow, systematic breaking that her husband called a marriage, the bruises and the terror written off as the symptoms of a decline that the Earl's money ensured no physician would question. The Duke had been able to do nothing. That was the bitterness of it, and the reason he had carried the knowledge like a stone for 3 years. There was no proof, only a frightened cousin's testimony, given in confidence, about bruises and terror in a dead woman who could no longer speak, and against the word of an earl, protected by wealth and rank and the world's reflexive deference to both. It was nothing, less than nothing, a slander that would ruin the cousin and touch the earl not at all. So the Duke had kept it, helplessly, a known cruelty he could not punish, had merely taken those quiet pains, ever after, to know the Earl of Mordaunt's movements, to be aware of him, to be braced, in some wordless way, against the day the man should reach for another girl. For the Duke knew, as a man knows such things, that the Earl was not finished, that a man who breaks one wife will look for another, and that somewhere out in the world there was a next girl, being measured for the cage that had killed Sophia. He had not known the next girl would be Lucy. He had not known, when his horse stopped in the storm, that the half-frozen creature in the drift was the very girl the Earl had been measuring, that the snow he pulled her from was the snow she had chosen over becoming the next Sophia. He learned it only when Lucy told him her story by the fire and named the Earl of Mordaunt, and described the first wife who had died thin and frightened of a fever no servant believed, and the Duke had sat there, feeling the 3-year-old stone in his chest turn all at once from helpless grief into something with an edge, for here, at last, was the use of the knowledge he had carried so uselessly, not to punish the Earl for Sophia, which he still could not do, but to protect the next girl. This girl, the one who had escaped the cage by a snowdrift's mercy. He could not avenge the wife the Earl had broken, but he could make very sure, with the drawn sword of what he knew, that the Earl never got his hands on the one who had got away. And when the Earl of Mordaunt came up the Thornleigh Drive to reclaim his property, the Duke of Thornleigh was waiting for him with 3 years of helpless grief, finally, at last, turned into a weapon that could do some good. And the Earl, looking into the Duke's gray eyes and seeing there the full, unburied knowledge of what had really happened to Sophia, understood that this was one girl he was not going to be permitted to break, and that the price of trying would be the careful surface of the life his money had bought him, and he did the only sensible thing left to him, which was to bow and sneer and go and never come back. Sophia could not be avenged. But Lucy was saved, and saved in part by Sophia's terrible testimony from beyond the grave. And the Duke promised himself, watching the Earl's carriage retreat down the drive, that some part of whatever life he and Lucy built would be spent making sure that the next Sophia and the next had somewhere to run that was not a snowdrift, and someone waiting who knew what the smiling cold men were and would not let the world look away. The Earl of Mordaunt was shown into the Thornleigh drawing-room with the cold confidence of a man who has never in his life been refused anything he could not eventually take. A handsome, smiling, immaculate man of perhaps 40, with pale eyes that smiled along with his mouth and never once warmed, and Lucy felt the instant he entered the old animal recoil she had felt the first time, the sense of being looked at by something that saw her as a thing. "Miss Fairfax," he said, smiling, ignoring her mother, ignoring the room, his pale eyes fixing on Lucy with a proprietary satisfaction that made her skin crawl. "What a great deal of trouble you have caused, running off into the snow like a foolish child. I confess I was diverted. I had not thought you had so much spirit. It does you credit in a way, and I find it has rather sharpened my appetite for the match. But the game is played out now, my dear, and it is time to come home. I am prepared to be generous. I will overlook this little adventure entirely. The visit to the Duke, the gossip, all of it. We will call it a visit to a relation. Your reputation will be perfectly safe with me, for who will gainsay a countess? You will come away with me now, and we will be married as arranged, and no more will be said of snowdrifts and dukes. Fetch your things. The carriage is waiting. I have been more than patient, and my patience, Miss Fairfax, is not a thing you wish to exhaust." And Lucy Fairfax looked at the smiling, cold-eyed man who had come to collect her like a parcel, and she found that she was not afraid of him at all, that the woman who had means of her own and a door of her own, and the protection of a duke, and, above all, the certain knowledge of her own worth, was simply, cleanly, finished with being afraid of the Earl of Mordaunt. "No," she said. The Earl's smile did not waver, but something behind the pale eyes did. "I beg your pardon?" I said, "No, my lord, no, I will not fetch my things. No, I will not come away with you. No, I will not marry you now or ever. No, to the whole of it. I refused you in my mother's hall some weeks ago, and I refused you so completely that I walked into a blizzard rather than be yours, and I very nearly died of the refusing. And I want you to understand, my lord, that having refused you with my own life, I am hardly likely to reconsider over a smile and the threat of your impatience. You have come a long way for nothing. I am not yours. I was never yours. I will never be yours. And if you imagine that the gossip frightens me, or your patience, or your threats, you have mistaken me entirely, as you mistook me from the first, for you looked at me and saw a beautiful penniless thing to be owned, and you never once saw the person, which is precisely why I would not have you, because a man who cannot see that a woman is a person is a man who will spend his marriage proving it, as you proved it to your first wife, who did not die of a fever, my lord, whatever you have paid people to say." The room went very still. The Earl's smile vanished. "You will want to be very careful," he said softly, the menace open now, "about what you say next, Miss Fairfax. You are a ruined girl with no money and no name and no protector, repeating servant slanders about your betters. You have no idea the harm I can do you. One word from me in the right ears and you are finished. Not merely poor, but disgraced, unmarriageable, cast out of every respectable house in England. You have nothing, and I have everything, and you would do very well to remember it before you say another word, and to fetch your things, and come quietly, while my generosity holds." "She is not a ruined girl with no money and no protector," said the Duke of Thornleigh from the doorway, where he had been standing, unnoticed, for rather longer than the Earl would have liked. "She is a woman of independent means, settled upon her in her own name, free and clear. So your ruin holds no terror for her, Mordaunt. She does not need a penny of yours or anyone's. She is under the protection of this house and of my grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, and of myself, so your threats in the right ears will be answered by my voice in louder ones, and I think you will find my ears the more numerous and the better placed. And she is not repeating servant slanders. She is repeating the truth about your first wife, which I happen, Mordaunt, to be in a position to know rather more of than you would wish, having taken some quiet pains over the years to know exactly what manner of man you are, against precisely such a day as this. So let us be very clear about the shape of this room. You have come to collect a possession. There is no possession here. There is a free woman who has refused you twice now, the second time to your face, and who is protected by means and friends entirely beyond your reach. And there is a great deal that I know about you, and am prepared to make known, should you ever trouble her again by so much as a word. You overplayed your hand, my lord, the day you let a girl choose the snow over your hand and live to be talked about for it. Now I think you had better go, quietly, while my generosity holds, to borrow your own charming phrase, for you have, this day, lost, and the only question remaining is how much more you lose before you understand it." The Earl of Mordaunt looked from the Duke to Lucy and back again, and the cold, pale eyes did their arithmetic. The settlement, the Duke's protection, the Duke's knowledge, the lost game. And he was, whatever else he was, not a stupid man, and he understood that he had indeed lost, and that to press further was to risk the one thing a man like him guards above all, which is the careful surface of his reputation. And his beautiful cold face rearranged itself, with an effort, back into its smile, though the smile was sickly now. "I see I have been misinformed as to the lady's situation," he said, with a stiff bow that cost him visibly. "I would not dream of pressing my suit where it is unwelcome. I wish you joy, Miss Fairfax, of your independence." He made the word a small sneer, the last petty weapon of a beaten man. And then, because the Duke of Thornleigh was looking at him with gray eyes that promised the full and public unburial of his first wife's death the moment he stepped wrong, the Earl of Mordaunt gathered the rags of his dignity and took himself out of the Thornleigh drawing-room and out of Lucy Fairfax's life, and did not trouble her again, for the Duke's knowledge hung over him ever after like a drawn sword, and a man with as much to hide as the Earl of Mordaunt learns quickly which sleeping dogs to let lie. And then it was over, the cage rooted, the Earl gone, the mother weeping quietly in her chair, and the Dowager Duchess of Thornleigh, who had come down at the sound of the carriage and watched the whole of it from a second doorway with the keenest enjoyment, rose to her feet and delivered the verdict that closed the matter. "Well," said the old woman, with vast satisfaction, "that was the most diverting quarter hour I have passed in a decade. A girl who would rather freeze than be sold, refusing a cruel earl to his face in my own drawing-room, with means of her own and her worth in her hand. Child, you are precisely what I hoped you were the moment you told me you would rather die than go back, and I have not been so pleased with anyone in years." She turned her sharp eyes on Mrs. Fairfax. "As for you, madam, you tried to sell this girl to that for money, and put her in the snow when she refused, and have come here today to try again. I should very much like to have you put out of doors. But my future granddaughter, I perceive, has decided to be merciful to you, on her own terms, with her own money, which is more than you deserve, and exactly the sort of thing that proves she is worth 10 of you. So I shall hold my tongue and let her mercy stand, and merely observe that you very nearly threw away, for the sake of a cruel man's money, the finest daughter in England, and that you will spend the rest of your modest-kept days knowing it. Now go and compose yourself somewhere. The grown people have things to discuss." And Mrs. Fairfax, thoroughly routed, fled, and the Dowager turned back to Lucy and the Duke, and her fierce old face softened into something very like glee. "And as for the two of you, I am 80 years old, I have buried a husband I was sold to and a son who was as cold as his father, and I have waited my whole life to see a Thornleigh man marry a woman who came to him free and knowing her own worth, which is the thing I never managed and his mother never managed, and not one of us in 5 generations ever managed. And I find I am not willing to wait 1 hour longer than I must. So I shall take myself off and leave you alone, which is shockingly improper and exactly what I intend, and you—" She fixed Lucy with a glittering eye. "You have, I believe, something to settle with my grandson, who has behaved, for once in his life, exactly as a man ought and deserves his answer. Give it to him. I shall be in the next room eavesdropping shamelessly. Go on." And she swept out, fierce and delighted, and shut the door and left them alone by the fire. For a moment neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Lucy stood with her father's book in her hand, as she always seemed to when the large moments came, and the Duke of Thornleigh stood a careful distance off, not pressing, as he had not pressed for weeks, waiting, as he had promised he would wait, to see what a free woman would do. "You gave me means," Lucy said at last, "and a door, and choices, and then you stepped back and asked nothing for weeks when you might have pressed your suit and very likely won it, for I was grateful and snowbound and half in love with you already. You gave me the freedom to leave you. That is the thing I keep returning to, Gabriel. You loved me and you wanted me, and the surest way to keep me was to leave me dependent and grateful, and instead, you made me independent and free, gave me every means to walk away from you forever, because you would rather lose me free than keep me caged. Do you know what that is? It is the exact opposite of everything that was ever done to your mother or attempted on me. It is the one thing in all the world that proves, beyond any words, that you meant what you said, that you wanted a free equal and not a possession. For no man who wanted to own me would ever have given me the means to leave. You gave me the power to refuse you, and that, Gabriel, is precisely why I am not going to." She crossed the room to him. "I have means of my own now. I have a door of my own. I could leave Thornleigh tomorrow and take a house and live independent and free for the rest of my life and never see you again. And I would want for nothing, and you have made very sure of it on purpose, so that whatever I choose freely. So hear my free choice, Gabriel, made by a woman who needs nothing from you, who could walk out that door this hour and be perfectly well. I choose you, not to be saved. I am saved, and I save myself in the snow by refusing to be sold, and you only finish the saving by giving me the means to stay saved. Not because I have no other door, I have every door now, you saw to that. I choose you, because with every door in the world open to me, the room I want to be in is the one with you in it, because you are the only man I have ever met who would rather set me free than keep me, because you read my father's words and understood them, because I love you, freely, as an equal, with my worth entirely intact, and a settlement of my own in the bank to prove I am not marrying to eat. That is the woman you said you waited 35 years for, the one who comes to you needing nothing and chooses you anyway. Well, here she is. I needed nothing, and I chose you. Yes, Gabriel. Ask me again the way you asked before, and this time I will not say I cannot. This time I will say yes, freely, as a free woman, knowing exactly what I am worth and choosing to spend it on you. And the Duke of Thornleigh, who had sworn over his mother's coffin that he would marry only a woman who came to him free, and knowing her own worth, or not at all, who had given up believing such a woman existed until his horse stopped in a snowstorm, looked at Lucy Fairfax, who had refused to be sold, and chosen the snow over the cage, and refused even him until she was free enough to choose him cleanly, and was now choosing him with every other door in the world standing open. And he found that the grave-guarded man who had not let himself want anything for 35 years was, at last, undone entirely. Lucy Fairfax, he said, free woman of independent means, who needs nothing from me and could walk out that door this hour. Will you marry me, not to be saved, for you are saved, not to be kept, for you keep yourself, but freely as an equal, two souls who know their own worth choosing each other with nothing forcing the choice but the choosing itself? Will you? Yes, said Lucy, freely, as an equal, with every door open and choosing this one. Yes. And she set her father's book down on the mantel, gently, for it had carried her through the snow and into this warm room, and it had earned its rest. And she put her free hands in his, and the Duke of Thornleigh drew the woman who would rather have starved than be sold into his arms at last, freely, as an equal, in the firelight, with the snow that had so nearly killed her falling soft and harmless now beyond the warm windows. And from the next room came a sound that was not quite a sob, and not quite a laugh, but the fierce glad noise of a very old woman who has waited 5 generations to see a thing done right, and has lived at last to see it. They were married in the spring, when the snow that had so nearly killed her had melted into the first green of the year. Married not as a rescue and a rescuer, nor as a fortune and a face, but as 2 free equals, who had each chosen the other with every door open. And the Dowager Duchess of Thornleigh wept all through the ceremony and pronounced it afterward and frequently the only Thornleigh marriage in living memory that had been made for the right reason, and the finest thing she had done with her 80 years was to have lived to see it. Lucy kept her settlement. The Duke would have had it otherwise, would have folded it back into the great Thornleigh fortune, as such things were usually done. But Lucy would not, and he, understanding, did not press. And so the Duchess of Thornleigh remained, all her married life a woman with means entirely her own, money that was hers and no one's else, not because she ever expected to need it, but because a woman who has once known what it is to have no door of her own does not, ever again, willingly give up the key to one. And the Duke, far from minding, found he loved her the more for it was the daily proof, renewed every quarter day, that she stayed with him not because she must, but because she chose to, a free woman who could leave at any hour and did not, which is the only kind of staying worth having. She kept her mother, too, as she had promised, modestly, at a distance, in a small, respectable house with a small, respectable income, where Mrs. Fairfax lived out her days in the chastened knowledge of what she had nearly done and what her daughter had become despite her, and the 2 of them were never close, for some things cannot be mended, but they were not enemies either, and Lucy visited dutifully and was civil and provided faithfully, and found that being the kind of person who keeps a mother who tried to sell her was its own quiet reward, the final proof that the cruelty had not, in the end, made her cruel. And she kept her father's book. It lived on the mantel of her own sitting room at Thornleigh, the small, cracked brown volume that had gone with her into the snow, and on winter evenings she would take it down and read from it aloud to her husband by the fire, as her father had once read to her, and in time to their children, 3 of them, who grew up at Thornleigh warm and loved and known, valued for their own particular souls, and not for what they might be sold or married or deployed to gain, raised by a mother who taught them, as her father had taught her, the one lesson she held above all others, reading it to them from the worn fly-leaf in faded ink until they knew it by heart. Remember always your own worth, for a soul that knows its value can never truly be made poor. They never had to learn it in the snow, those children, as their mother had, but they learned it. She saw to that. It was, she always said, the only inheritance that truly mattered, the only wealth that no creditor could claim, and no marriage could buy, and no cruelty could take. And she had carried it out of the cold in a cracked brown book against her heart, and she spent the rest of her warm and chosen life giving it away to everyone she loved. And they built the living monument Lucy had resolved upon in the gallery, though it took some years to grow into its full shape. It began small, a single house on the edge of the Thornleigh lands, quietly opened and quietly kept, a refuge for women and girls with nowhere safe to go, the ones being measured for cages, the ones cast out for refusing them, the ones who would otherwise have only the snow, a girl who would not marry where she was sold, a wife fleeing a smiling cold cruelty no one would believe, a penniless gentlewoman with a hard choice and no door. Such a one could come there and be taken in, and fed, and warmed, and kept safe, and helped to means and choices of her own, so that she need never stand where Lucy had stood, with only 2 roads before her and both of them ruin. They did not make a great public charity of it. The Duke had learned from the matter of the Earl's first wife how the powerful protect the powerful and how loudly proclaimed virtue invites loudly mounted opposition. So they kept it quiet and effective and growing, a thing known to the women who needed it through the soft, sure channels by which the desperate learn where mercy lives. They named it after some thought, not for Lucy and not for the Duke, and not even for the fated woman in the gallery, but a thing simpler and truer. They called it, on the small plain board by its door, Fairfax House, for Lucy's father, the gentle scholar who had taught one girl her own worth so thoroughly that she walked into a blizzard rather than betray it, and whose lesson, multiplied now through every woman who passed through those doors and learned it in her turn, had become a kind of wealth he could never have imagined, spreading outward from a cracked brown book of verse into more saved and self-knowing lives than either Lucy or the Duke would ever be able to count. Over the door, beneath the name, at Lucy's wish, they set the words from the fly-leaf, carved now in good oak for every frightened arriving woman to read. A soul that knows its value can never truly be made poor. Most of the women who came did not, at first, believe it. Many of them had been taught, as the Duke's mother was taught, the exact opposite, all their lives. But they learned it at Fairfax House, learned it the way Lucy had learned it, not in the snow but in the warmth, from people who fed them and freed them and waited patiently for the frightened thing to gentle back into a self that knew its worth. And they carried it out again into the world. Those women, one after another, year after year, the way Lucy had carried it out of her mother's cold hall, a wealth that could not be bought and could not be sold and could only ever be given away, which Lucy Fairfax, who had very nearly died holding it against her heart in a snowdrift, spent the whole of her long, warm, chosen life doing, with both hands, to everyone the cold ever sent her way. So bank your fire now, and turn your lamp low, and let the dark draw gentle and close. A girl was told to sell herself or starve, and she chose to starve rather than be sold, and walked into the snow with nothing but her father's words about her own worth held against her heart. And the cold very nearly took her, and instead a horse stopped, and a good man climbed down into a drift, and found not a possession to be owned but a free soul to be cherished. And she was warmed and freed and chosen, and she chose in return, with every door in the world open to her, the one warm room she wanted. And somewhere tonight, by some other fire, in some house I shall never look upon, you have kept her company to the end of her story. And I am glad of it, more glad than I can say, and I should dearly love to know where in the world you have been listening from. Hold fast to your own worth, whatever the world offers for it. It is the one thing that is wholly yours, and it cannot be bought, and it cannot be sold unless you let it. Sleep well. There will be another fire and another story when next the candles are lit,